Wes, Helm, min friend, and welcome to yet another video. My dear friends, there have been some requests for me to address the many changes that Peter Jackson did to The Lord of the Rings when he was adapting it over 20 years ago and made his legendary The Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, of course, we know that when one is making an adaptation, one has to omit things or change things and sometimes even add things, because after all, the book and the film are completely different media. But I always say, and if you've been following my channel for quite some time, you know that there is a difference between an adaptation and an abomination. And even though I will always prefer the source material, if you ask me, well, choose one, I will always go for the book given the chance. But I am also willing to admit that some adaptations are worthy of the source material and some are not. And some are not even, well, worthy being called an adaptation, such as The Rings of Power by Amazon, but we are not here to do that. We are here to address my top 5 changes that Peter Jackson did to The Lord of the Rings as opposed to the book. Of course, this is my list, you can have your own, but also I need to say that I'm not saying that these changes are good or bad. I'm not saying they were did for the worse or for the better. I'm only saying that I consider these things to be the most essential changes that were done to the films. Now, of course, I will go a little bit into the detail, not too much. I don't want to take up much of your time as far as what could have been if Peter Jackson kept the source material as it was originally written. The last thing before I start that I will say is that I do consider some of these things to be necessary for the film medium. Some of these things could have been kept as they were. All right, then. So shall we start with, I would say, the most prominent and dominant ones in the Fellowship of the Ring for me. And that is, of course, we are talking about the sequence when Arwen saved the halflings and Aragorn from the ring wraiths. And, of course, for those of you who have read the books, know that it was not Arwen, but it was Glorfindel, the elvish lord who was born in Valinor and in Tirion, and who followed Fingolfin during the big flight, if you remember, from the Silmarillion, and who also took part at the huge flight from Valinor to Middle-earth. However, he did not take part in the kinslaying of Alqualonde when he followed the host of Fingolfin. Then, of course, in the first age of Middle-earth, he was known for being the lord of the of the house of the Golden Flower and Gondolin, and one of the king's captains. And then during the fall of Gondolin, he fought, and that is actually one of the most extraordinary and heroic stories of Tolkien's Legendarium. He fought the second Balrog Lord, Lungorthin, and he fell into the abyss where he perished. But his deeds, my dear friends, were so great and so heroic that he was allowed to leave the halls of Mandos. He was summoned from the halls of Mandos and he was allowed to dwell in Valinor, from where he was then sent by Manwë to Middle-earth as the emissary of the Valar. And he was given a huge and awesome power, almost comparable to the one of the Maiar. And then later, of course, he is known for standing up against the Witch King, chasing him away, and then, of course, saving Frodo and the companions against the ring wraiths. Now, what is interesting is that originally in the stories, there were 2 different Glorfindel. The first one from the Gondolin, the second one then from the Rivendell, from Imladris. They were just 2 different persons, had nothing to do with each other. But Tolkien then decided that they were one and the same person. So, if Peter Jackson kept it in the film, it would be one of the most powerful elves in the history of Middle-earth saving him. And if done correctly, I believe that those scenes could have been 1,000 times more epic. However, that would be adding too much lore, too much of new legendarium, too much new exposition, too much new explaining to the film, which, even though the extended editions are about 4 hours long each, there's so much time, only so much time you can have in a film still. So it is understandable that he had to be got rid of, and he was even omitted in Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings. That it's only understandable that he had to be got rid of and replaced by Arwen. Also, there is one more understandable thing. We know that The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, due to the fact that they are basically books about dangerous journeys and about war, especially in The Lord of the Rings, there were very few women in that book. So it is only understandable that Peter Jackson wanted to add some female essence into that film, and that he, elaborated upon the role of Arwen that she originally had. There is a beautiful description in The Lord of the Rings of Glorfindel, which goes, Glorfindel was tall and straight, his hair was of shining gold, his face fair and young and fearless and full of joy. His eyes were bright and clean, and his voice like music. On his brow sat wisdom, and in his hand was strength. So as you can see, it's just one line, and you can imagine how much powerful that guy was. But also, we have to say that he couldn't really be included in today's modern interpretation of The Lord of the Rings or any other books by Tolkien. You know why. Just look at the description. All right, then. So this is my top one. We move on, and then we come to probably the most controversial change that Peter Jackson did. It's not really a change, it's an omission. And the vast majority of people really mind Peter Jackson omitting this aspect, and that's Tom Bombadil and the Barrow-wights. Well, of course, my dear friends, we know that on the journey, Frodo and his hobbit companions stopped at the house of Tom Bombadil, and before that they were almost, made go away by Old Man Willow. And then after the visit of Tom Bombadil, they encountered the Barrow-wights, which then, of course, Tom Bombadil saved them. And once again, all the sequence and the chapters before and after concerning Tom Bombadil could be considered a story of their own, enclosed. They are a part of The Lord of the Rings, of course, but if you remove them from the story, both the Old Man Willow, Tom Bombadil, and the Barrow-wights, you don't really change the vast scope of the story, of the narrative, by which I mean, by removing those three aspects, by removing the chapters concerning Tom Bombadil and the Barrows and Old Man Willow, Peter Jackson really did nothing to stop the narrative. He didn't change that much. It didn't change the story at all. So I do understand that these things, the omission of these three things was done to save time. Basically to get rid of something that really didn't particularly move the story anywhere. However, if he did add Tom Bombadil, it would be adding a little bit more mystery into the story. And that is what is so beautiful about all three things that we are talking about here, about Tom Bombadil, about Old Man Willow, and about the Barrows, because all those three things are extremely mysterious. We don't really know the origin of them. We don't really know who they are or what they are, and there have been many theories. And people will be coming up in the comments down below with their own theories or something that they have read. But the truth of the matter is nobody knows who Tom Bombadil is. By his own description, he is, and I quote, "Eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He made paths before the big people and saw the little people arriving. He was here before the kings and the graves and the Barrow-wights. When the elves passed westward, Tom was here already, before seas were bent. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside. And then, of course, when being asked about, much later, when being described, it is said about Tom Bombadil, say rather that the ring has no power over him. He is his own master, but he cannot alter the ring itself, nor break its power over the others. And now he is withdrawn into a little land within bounds that he has set, though none can see them, waiting perhaps for a change of days, and he will not step beyond them. But then, of course, of these two lines and these two passages, and not only them, but everything about Tom Bombadil suggests that he could be either Manwë, living in a mortal body, or even Eru Ilúvatar himself, some other Valar or one of the Maiar, but it's really nobody knows. All right, then. I would like to continue with the Mouth of Sauron, which, of course, that is something that has been added, or was added, to the extended edition of The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King in the end. And it was in the book, obviously, as well. But this is one of the minor changes that were done to the film, because all in all, it really, the outcome of this entire conversation and this thing was the same in the book and in the film. However, if you remember in the film, Aragorn was speaking with the Mouth of Sauron, the lieutenant of the Dark Lord, and after a very brief time he decapitated the emissary. In the book it happened a little bit differently. I shall read two short extracts from the book, from the conversation, from that scene when the lieutenant of Sauron was talking to, the powers of the good. And the first snippet goes, "Is there anyone in this rout with authority to treat than me?" he asked, "or indeed with wit to understand me?" "Not thou at least," he mocked, turning to Aragorn with scorn. "It needs more to make a king than a piece of elvish glass or a rabble such as this. Why, any brigand of the hills can show as good a following." Aragorn said naught in answer, but he took the other's eye and held it, and for a moment they strove thus, but soon, though Aragorn did not stir nor move hand to weapon, the other quailed and gave back as if menaced with a blow. "I am a herald and an ambassador, and may not be assailed," he cried. And then he was talking with Gandalf, because he chose to be the speaker. And Gandalf said, "These we will take," said Gandalf suddenly. He cast aside his cloak, and the white light shone forth like a sword in that black place. Before his upraised hand the foul messenger recoiled, and Gandalf coming seized and took from him the tokens, coat, cloak, and sword. "These we will take in memory of our friend," he cried. "But as for your terms, we reject them utterly. Get you gone, for your embassy is over, and death is near to you. We did not come here to waste words entreating with Sauron, faithless and accursed, still less with one of his slaves. Begone!" And then it continues by the Mouth of Sauron actually going back to Mordor, beyond the Black Gates. So as you can see, in the book, they have treated the emissary with more or less respect. They treated the custom of when somebody is a messenger actually not harming him. But what is beautiful about it is that they didn't even have to put their hands on their swords. It just was enough for Aragorn to look at Mouth of Sauron, and Mouth of Sauron recoiled because he saw the strength and the power of the King Elessar. And of course then, when Gandalf was talking to him, he was absolutely destroyed just by Gandalf's appearance and words. So there you can see the might and the power of the good characters, of our heroes, of Aragorn and of Gandalf. Just by simple look and a word, they were able to make the Mouth of Sauron afraid of them. But this was, of course, the more regal and the more honorable side of those characters, which are prominent and dominant in the book. In the film, it is only understandable from a certain point of view that they made the characters into more, shall we say, action-like heroes, like John Wayne characters. Like Aragorn, for example, he differs very much from the book at that aspect. In the film, he's much less regal, much less royal, much less proud, because I think that they focused more on the strider, more on the ranger side of Aragorn in the films than on his Elessar side. And once again, for an action film that is supposed to be made for the wide audience, I think that is more understandable to make him into more of a John Wayne character. Now, the next thing that I think was quite important, quite a huge change, was the fate of Saruman and the ending of The Lord of the Rings itself. You know, in the film, the extended edition of the Return of the King, Saruman's demise was, of course, at the hands of Grima Wormtongue and Legolas. Well, not Legolas. Legolas actually shot Grima in the film. Sorry, Grima Wormtongue, and then he fell from Orthanc from the tower, and he fell on a spike. It was different in the book, of course. At the very end of The Lord of the Rings, in the book, we get to know that Saruman had actually survived, and that he went with his servants to the Shire, and he took over the Shire, he planted it, and he almost ruled over the hobbits. But fortunately, it was just in time. The hobbits, our heroes, arrived, and they summoned the hobbits, and they really gave them strength and courage. They confronted Saruman, and the ending actually was the very same way. He demised at the hands of Grima Wormtongue. But the truth of the matter is that the ending of The Lord of the Rings, the book, was spoiled by, well, not spoiled, it was a great ending, but the happy ending, shall we say, of The Lord of the Rings was stained by this Shire chapter where Saruman took over for a little bit. Now, I understand why they omitted this from the film. And it is quite simple. I will not take much of your time by that explanation. Because the Lord of the Rings movies already have 1,500 endings. And that's actually something people are making fun of. That it's very long, but it's like the longest ending in the history of movie making. And I understand that this needed to be changed. Although I don't like the change, I need to understand it. But also, this kind of happy ending that appeared in The Lord of the Rings, the films, is much more understandable than if it were done differently. And the last change that I'm going to talk about is more of a honorable mention. It's something that people love and something that people hate. But I think that out of all these changes, this is a change that people are most willing to forgive. And that's the arrival of the Elven army in Helm's Deep in the Two Towers. Of course, they didn't arrive in the book. And the only force that saved Middle-earth, who helped really King Theoden, was Gandalf arriving with Eomer and his men. But it needs to be said, and this is just my own personal view and my own personal experience, this scene from the film is connected with my father, because it is his most favorite scene from that film. He has read the books, he has seen the films, he is not as militant about the source material and changes and adaptations as I am. And when I watch The Lord of the Rings with my father, and I love to watch The Lord of the Rings with my dad, he always sheds a tear when the elves arrived in Helm's Deep, and Haldir says that they are here to fulfill the old promises, and then when he perishes by the hand of an Uruk-hai warrior, it's just so touching to see my dad being so emotional. And that is why it is a change that I'm most willing to forgive, because it is so closely connected with somebody I love very dearly. All right then. So this was my top 5 changes. It has been a long video. I hope you enjoyed it. And what I want you, my dear friends, to tell me what your favorite or least favorite changes are that Peter Jackson made in his films as opposed to the books. And that will be all. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm out of here.